Good afternoon, everyone. This is Cheryl Gibbs. I am the Senior Director of the International and Foreign Language Education Office at the U.S. Department of Education. It is my pleasure to present this application preparation webinar to you for applications under the Fiscal Year 2020 International Research and Studies Program competition. This is the last competition that IFLE is hosting for this fiscal year, and I'm excited about it because for this competition, we are inviting applications for surveys, studies, and research projects, in addition to applications for applicants who want to propose instructional materials development projects. You may recall from 2017 that we invited applications only for research studies and surveys. So this opportunity is a win-win for you and the department in that it will allow us to expand the resources for the international education community. With that, I will begin the webinar. Before you begin any endeavor or invitation or accept an invitation to any grant program that the Department of Education IFLE office offers, the best thing to do is to read the Federal Register notice inviting applications thoroughly to ensure that your prospective application is consistent. In other words, does it fit with the overall purpose of Title VI, and specifically, does it fit with the specific requirements of the International Research and Studies Program? Very often I get requests from prospective applicants that they want to propose very generic proposals under this program. And unfortunately, that's not possible, and we will deem the application ineligible. All of the international research and studies applications should fall into the overall mission of Title VI, which is increasing the capacity of the United States through institutions or individuals to increase the capacity in area studies, international studies, and foreign language capacity. In the realm of Title VI, that foreign language capacity focuses on least commonly taught languages and less commonly taught languages. You will note, however, in the IRS regulations, it says that it does not necessarily have to focus on least or less commonly taught languages, although that is the expectation. In other words, to the extent that your application still focuses on least commonly taught languages or less commonly taught languages, that makes your application far more competitive. So again, read the notice that was published in the Federal Register last week to really get a feel whether you want to take this next steps to apply for an application because, apply for a grant, because there's a lot of work involved in preparing these applications. So the next thing, when are the applications due? They are due on September 8th, 2020, of course, at 11:59 p.m. In other words, your application must post on the grants.gov site by that time. Anytime, even a second after that, the system will not process the application. It will reject it. It will stamp it as do not process. So please get your application in a few days before September 8th, but by all means, no later than 11:59 p.m. on September 8th, 2020. When you're trying to locate the application, the IRS program competes on the grants.gov site. The application funding opportunity number is ed-grants.gov 080620. That's the date that the NIA was published in the Federal Register, and then followed by -001. To find the application, you need to click through 2 or 3 screens once you are on the grants.gov site, and look for a button that says Download Instructions. That's where the application is. That site is not necessarily intuitive, so I'm letting you know where to find it. You will see a page that has the list of forms that are available for the program, and you will also see on the right-hand side of that screen a download button. The IRS program purpose. The International Research and Studies Program provides grants to institutions, public and private agencies, organizations, and individuals to conduct research and studies to improve and strengthen instruction in modern foreign languages, area studies, and other international fields. The IRS program has this distinction from other Title VI programs in that we are reaching out to private and public agencies, organizations, and individuals. Most of our programs are geared for institutional applicants, but the IRS program is broader than that, and that it includes these other entities as well. More specifically, the research and studies under this program, again, we're inviting 2 types of applications. Research and studies may include the following types of activities under this program. Excuse me, and these are in the notice inviting applications as well. And the heading, the research and studies may include, that's not to say that we're looking only for research and studies. They're using this terminology for the program. So under this program, there are several types of activities that can be submitted under this program. So one of the activities is studies and surveys to determine needs for increased or improved instruction in modern foreign languages, area studies, or other international fields, including the demand for foreign language, area studies, or other international specialists in government education and the private sector. The key piece of that is the demand. Times are always changing. The geopolitical landscape is always changing, and there is a demand for specialists in these areas. The IRS program provides a unique opportunity for applicants to propose this type of study that will look at where the demand is for these types of specialists in these various fields. Another type of activity that's allowable under the program is research on more efficient methods of providing instruction and achieving competency in foreign languages, area studies, or other international fields. And the key word here is more efficient. There are a lot of materials and research out there in the public domain now that may not be as efficient as what the international field currently needs. So in thinking about this as a possible activity, think about how you can propose something that is more efficient to meet these objectives of providing instruction and achieving competency in foreign languages and area studies and other international fields. Continuing in the allowable activities under this program, you can propose a project that looks at research on applying performance tests and standards across all areas of foreign language instruction and classroom use. Now, when I interpret this, I would not expect that one application would propose a performance test across all areas of foreign language instruction. I read that to mean that based on your area of expertise, your language of expertise, this activity, item C, allows you to propose research on a performance test or standards that can be applied across your foreign language of expertise. It does not, it wouldn't be prudent for us to expect one language area to provide a performance test or standard that meets performance or standards for another language. So bear that in mind. We are looking for what you would propose as it relates to your area of expertise, your language of expertise for item number C, and how it can be applied in classroom use. Item D, another activity is developing and publishing specialized materials for use in foreign language, area studies, and other international fields, or for training foreign language, area, and other international specialists. So you have two things on that side of that conjunction, or. You can develop and publish the specialized materials for use in foreign language, area studies, and other international fields, and that use is pretty broad. Or you can take the tact that you're going to develop something for training purposes in foreign language, area studies, and other international specialists. Another allowable activity, studies and surveys to assess the use of graduates of programs supported under Title VI of the Higher Education Act by governmental, educational, and private sector organizations and other studies assessing the outcomes and effectiveness of supported programs. This is a hot topic right now in the federal government, and especially under this administration. We all want to know, what is the impact of monies that are going out the door cycle after cycle, whether it be through new competitions or non-competing continuation competitions? What is the impact of Title VI on graduates of these programs? And the Title VI programs, as you might know, include programs like the Undergraduate International Studies in Foreign Language program, the National Resource Centers program, the Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowships program, the Language Resource Centers program, the Centers for International Business Education, the American Overseas Research Centers program, and of course, this particular program, the International Research and Studies. Collectively, those programs comprise about $62 million annually that we issue in grant award notifications. So when you multiply that over years of awarding these grants, there is a significant amount of impact, there's a significant level of impact, and a significant number of persons who are impacted by these programs. So this particular activity gives an opportunity, should you accept doing this particular activity, it gives you an opportunity to take a look at where are graduates of these programs working? Where are they being hired? Are they in the government space, education, private sector, or other areas? And then how are you going to assess the outcomes and effectiveness of the program supported, those programs that I just mentioned? You can choose one, You can use programs that are complementary, whatever you decide, but the main thing of this particular activity is to determine the impact on graduates of Title VI programs. The next activity that you can take a look at is comparative studies of the effectiveness of strategies to provide international capabilities at institutions of higher education. So you would take a look at existing comparative studies and make a determination about what strategies were effective to provide international capacity or capabilities at institutions of higher education. You would naturally carve out a reasonable scope when you consider that there are thousands of institutions of higher education. You can do comparative studies of community colleges, comparative studies of certain types of four-year institutions, but that would be up to you to determine the scope. The next activity that the IRS program supports is evaluation of the extent to which programs assisted under Title VI address national needs and would not otherwise be offered. This is similar to the impact of graduates in that we want to know where these monies are being used, the impact of Title VI funds. But in this particular activity, it's a little more focused in how have these programs addressed national needs. And national needs is also broad. Our Title VI legislation does not define national needs, but it implies that there are needs in the United States to have capacity for people who can conduct soft diplomacy. There's a national need for economists that have an understanding of international economies. There's a national need in cybersecurity, and the list can go on and on about what our national needs are. As you know, that security was the fundamental and foundational purpose of Title VI after the launch of Sputnik. But in 50, 60 years since then, the national needs have definitely expanded to other areas of expertise for the United States. So if you choose to focus on an activity around evaluation of national needs, you would expand your inquiry into a broader range of national needs. And because of that, addressing those national needs, the Title VI, that would not happen were not for the Title VI programs that are being offered. So if you chose that particular activity, that would be a part of your application proposal as well, as coming to that conclusion that it would not happen without the assistance of Title VI. And letter H, studies and surveys of the use of technologies in foreign languages, area studies, and international studies programs. So that's pretty straightforward. Technologies have changed dramatically, even over the 3 years since we last conducted this competitions. Technologies are changing every day. So if you want to investigate this as an activity, there's a wealth of information available about the use of technologies in foreign language, area studies, and international studies programs. Letter I is another activity, studies and evaluations of effective practices in the dissemination of international information, materials, research, teaching strategies, and testing techniques throughout the educational community, including elementary and secondary schools. This one is similar to the previous one about technologies. There are so many different ways to disseminate information now, and the need for dissemination of materials is really important now. So this activity allows you to investigate and to propose a study and evaluation of effective practices in the dissemination of these materials. Activity number J, letter J, evaluation of the extent to which programs assisted under Title VI of the Higher Education Act reflect diverse perspectives and a wide range of views and generate debate on world regions and international affairs as described in the grantee's application. This is taken right from the IRS regulations, although it's normally applied to the National Resource Centers program. The fact that it is presented in the IRS program purpose, it can be broader than that. So this particular activity would allow you to take a look at all Title VI programs that are assisted under HEA, and that would include NRC, FLAS, Useful, LRC. If there's opportunity for those programs to have a wide range of views, diverse views, and if there are opportunities for those programs to generate debates on world regions and international affairs, this activity would be an activity for you to look into. So it's not just limited to the National Resource Centers or the Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowship program. Activity K looks at the systematic collection, analysis, and dissemination of data that contribute to achieving the purposes of Title VI, Part A of the Higher Education Act. Again, when it mentions Title VI, Part A, I refer again to programs like the Undergraduate International Studies and Foreign Language Education Program, National Resource Centers, Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowships, Language Resource Centers, American Overseas Research Centers, Centers for International Business Education. If you chose to select this activity, you would look at systematic collection, analysis, and dissemination of data that contribute to the purposes of those programs. And if you did, I would suggest narrowing it to one or two of those programs. An application would not be as competitive if you tried to look at collection, analysis, and dissemination across 5 or 6 programs. And the last bucket under the IRS program purpose is support for programs or activities to make data collected, analyzed, or disseminated under Title VI publicly available and easy to understand. And again, this is an important activity, and I'm not suggesting that you choose it, but the need for it is relevant because we collect, as you know, a lot of data under our programs through the International Research Information System. And it's hard to get that information out and disseminate it to the public where they can see what these programs do, the impact of those programs, and what those data mean. So this is an activity that for those who are interested in data collection and analysis, this might be a broad activity for you to select. So these activities, A through L, are in the IRS program purpose. Again, I refer you to the notice inviting applications. The very first part of that notice lists these activities as allowable activities under the program. Now, within those allowable activities, we, in this competition, decided to allow applicants to choose one or the other type of activity. So the department invites applicants to submit an application to request a grant for either a research, studies, and surveys project or a specialized instructional materials project. You may not submit both types of applications, although in 2 or 3 weeks it would be nearly impossible to submit both, but we are advising you to choose one or the other type of application, research, studies, and surveys, or specialized instructional materials. When you fill out the SF424 cover sheet of your application, in section 15, in field 15, please be very clear as to the type of application you are submitting. So in section 15 of the cover page, you would submit, this is an application for a research and studies and surveys project. Or you would put on that line, this is a request or grant proposal for specialized instructional materials. One or the other, please. And that will aid in our screening the applications and assigning them appropriately to the review panels. Again, we are operating under a very constrained timeline, so the extent to which you can help our efforts on this end by making sure you have designated the type of application you are submitting in line 15, it would be greatly appreciated. And we don't want to assign your application to a panel that is reading evaluation studies if your project is instructional materials and vice versa. So make sure you indicate what kind of project it is that you are submitting. Within A through L, that whole menu of allowable activities, we are allowing an opportunity for you to get competitive preference points. So within that menu of activities, we pulled out activities, again, that would allow you to get priority points. The first competitive preference priority is research on more effective methods of providing instruction and achieving competency in modern foreign languages, area studies, or international fields. Again, that's research on more effective methods. More effective is the important part of this. More effective methods of providing instruction and achieving competency in modern foreign languages, area studies, or international fields. It could very well be that over the course of the last year or two or whatever time period, you have given some thought to this very activity, that there are better ways to offer instruction. There are more effective methods. And so if this is your specific area of interest, you can propose this in your narrative as part of the narrative, a competitive preference priority that focuses on this. Competitive preference priority 2, studies and surveys to assess the use of graduates of programs supported under Title VI. And again, I talked about this when we went through the full menu, but to get priority points, if you chose that, you would get priority points for this activity. Looking at where do our graduates of Title VI programs, where do they end up? Do they end up in governmental, educational, private sector organizations? And you can also look at other studies assessing the outcomes and effectiveness of supported programs. In other words, these are linked together because in order for graduates to be successfully placed in these sectors, there had to be something about the Title VI programs that were effective. So your activity, this priority, gets at that. So you're not only placing the students or doing a study of where these graduates end up, but what is it about Title VI? What is it about language capacity and strengthening? What about area studies that allows these programs to be effective? And the last competitive preference priority for the competition, also drawn from that menu, is developing and publicizing specialized materials for use in foreign language, area studies, and other international fields, or for training foreign language, area, and other international specialists. So of the three competitive preference priorities, you would be able to plug either whatever you're deciding. If you're deciding to apply for a research studies and survey project or the development of specialized instructional materials, one of these three competitive preference priorities would be applicable to your project. We were intentional to do that so no one felt left out. So the opportunity for competitive preference points is available regardless of the type of application you are submitting. So let me repeat that. The opportunity for competitive preference points is available regardless of the type of application you are submitting. If you're submitting a research study or survey, you have the opportunity to select one of these priorities. If you are submitting a development of instructional materials proposal, the opportunity for you to get priority points exists. So just take a careful look at what's available out of number 1, 2, or 3. Choose one of them, and that will be incorporated into your application narrative. So we will dive into the selection criteria for each type of application. For a research project, study, or survey, these are the types, or these are the selection criteria. The plan of operation is worth up to 10 points, and that's Federal Register language up to 10 points, but you may get 10 points or fewer is a better way to look at that. So when the reviewers read your plan of operation, they can award 10 points down to 0 points. So looking at the plan of operation, the Secretary reviews each application for information that shows the quality of the plan of operation for the project. And we're looking at these particular factors. Is your plan of high quality? The design of the plan, high quality. So you're looking, it's like anything else, if you're designing a project, the very infrastructure of that project needs to be of high quality. So if you're proposing your research study or survey and you've designed it out, you need to make it clear to the readers, or they can make that assessment, that your design is of high quality. Does the plan of operation incorporate an effective plan of management that ensures proper and efficient administration? So this gets to oversight of the project, whether it's you as a project director or a complement or a collaborative group. Is the management plan effective, starting from year 1 through year 3. The whole plan of management needs to ensure that there's going to be effective and efficient administration and oversight of the project. And when you think about administration of the project, you're looking at the program content and the financial part of the project. So together, make sure you have the right internal controls and the oversight in place that will ensure that this project is run effectively. Another consideration in the plan of operation is a clear description of how the objectives of the project relate to the purposes of the program. Again, we are linking back to the overall purpose of Title VI, which is to strengthen capacity in area studies, international studies, and foreign language training. That is the umbrella that you're under, the description. Does it fit the Title VI purpose? And then to the specific purposes of the IRS program. So we don't want projects that are outside of the realm of area studies, international studies, foreign language training. So your project should clearly explain that we're in the right ballpark. We know what we're talking about as it relates to Title VI. And as an aside, we very often get applications under this program that speak to, such things as, I would like to develop a youth development program for my community where folks can understand what it means to be a good citizen, where we can give them good coping skills for life skills. That is not an appropriate application under the IRS program. So again, item 3, make sure that what you're proposing relates to the purposes of Title VI overall and specifically to the purposes of the International Research and Studies program. Under the selection criterion, another sub-factor is the way you plan to use your resources and personnel to achieve each objective. So this, again, speaks to administrative responsibilities about time allocation, talent allocation, and whether the persons you have selected to work on the project are fit for the project. So you would address this in item number 4, the way you plan to use the resources that are available to you to achieve each objective of your project. And item 5, sub-criterion 5, a clear description of how you will provide equal access and treatment for eligible project participants who are members of groups that have been traditionally underrepresented, such as members of racial or ethnic minority groups, women, and handicapped persons. This criterion cuts across every Title VI grant program that's available under Title VI. So you would talk about how you plan to provide access to these individuals or groups, a clear description of how you plan to do that. And I might add, from my experience with peer reviewers, they take this criterion very seriously. They do not want applicants glossing over it. They do not appreciate generalized statements about it. They look for very detailed information about how you, the applicant, take this very seriously. So in your description, be as specific as you possibly can to convince the readers that this is a very important aspect of your project, that you will do this. not will do it, but it's also helpful to indicate through other activities or projects or funded grant programs your record of doing this. So it's to strengthen this, it's not just a matter that we will do it, but we have done it. And these are examples of how we have done it. Continuing with the research projects and studies selection criteria, the next criterion is quality of key personnel. Again, it's worth 10 points, and we're looking for the following. We want to know that the quality of the key personnel that you propose to use on the project, they have the qualifications, and we're looking at the qualifications of the lead of the project director, if one is to be used. And often, in many cases, international research and studies projects are proposed by individuals. So they are not necessarily a project director, they are the researcher or the instructional material developer, not necessarily called a project director. But in any case, the person who is leading this effort, we are looking that they have the qualifications to do it. So the qualifications of the project director, if one is to be used, and we're looking for the qualifications of each of the other key personnel to be used in the project. If you're using faculty on your project, in the case of faculty, the qualifications of the faculty and the degree to which the faculty is directly involved in the actual teaching and supervising of students. You might have noticed, if you've read thoroughly the regulations for the IRS program, the program doesn't allow for funds for the direct support of students or monies to students, but it does absolutely support faculty who are involved in research projects that involve teaching and supervising of students. So perhaps you're looking at a research project of how heritage language learners learn language, or you're doing a research project on that. It would definitely involve language faculty that you would put on the grant that are actually participating in the project and that can inform that study of how they observe or how heritage learners learn language. So that's where you would provide the qualifications of faculty involved in a project such as that. Another factor in this key personnel is the time that each person referred to in the previous paragraphs. How much time do they commit to the project? What is their time and effort? So that's important that there's a balance there, that whatever is assigned to them, does it make sense for the overall project? A matter of balance. So make sure that you're clearly saying that the time that you are assigning to each person on the project makes sense. What are they committing to the project? And that time commitment is reasonable. The time commitment makes sense for what they will be doing. And the extent to which the applicant, as part of its non-discriminatory Employment Act practices, encourages applicants for these various groups. The previous criterion spoke to access. This particular sub-criterion speaks to actual employment. So we're talking about access and we're talking about employment in these non-discriminatory criteria. So again, be as detailed and convincing as you possibly can, citing not only what you will do, but give information that you have done this. Okay, moving on. So that brings us to item 3, under this criterion. And to determine the qualifications of a person, the Secretary considers evidence of past experience and training in fields related to the objectives of the project, as well as other information that you might provide to enhance this response. So for the key personnel, you're not only looking at their qualifications, but you need to incorporate that they have experience in this area that you're pursuing in this application. So we're looking at evidence of past experience and training in fields related to the objectives of the project, as well as other information that the applicant provides. So if you're doing research on language acquisition, language training, the persons that you have as key personnel, you would just include information that says they definitely have experience in these areas. The next criterion for research and studies on surveys projects is budget and cost effectiveness, 5 points. So we're looking at how well the budget supports the project. You're looking at information that shows the project has an adequate budget and is cost effective. Again, we're looking at scale, we're looking at balance, we're looking at how appropriate the costs are. So the Secretary, the peer reviewers are looking for information that shows the budget for the project is adequate to support the activities. That's very straightforward. The peer reviewers are looking at whether costs are reasonable in relation to the objectives of the project, and that takes care of those 5 points. So again, make sure you're looking at scope, balance, reasonableness, and I throw in common sense. Does it make sense what you're proposing? All a matter of scale. It's all a matter of appropriateness. So if your budget includes a lot of travel to conduct surveys, to conduct interviews, that portion of your travel budget might be a little bit higher than another portion of the budget. So just make sure that you are proposing a budget that makes sense. The next criterion for a research, studies, and survey project is the evaluation plan. And we're reviewing the application to determine the quality of the evaluation plan for the project. And in determining that, we're looking for information that shows whether the methods of evaluation are appropriate and the extent possible, to the extent possible, whether those methods are objective and will produce data that are quantifiable. In the application package that is posted, the evaluation plan in there is the department's pretty general evaluation plan. At the least, that's what we're looking for. But when you delve into an evaluation plan, you should present a plan that shows you have thought out your full timeline for the project. You have thought about the kinds of evaluations that you're going to use, whether they are impact evaluations, formative and summative evaluations, the timeline for conducting those evaluations. Does it make sense to start out the gate with an evaluation one, or does it make sense to get a year of work underway and then have an evaluation of your progress thus far? Does it make sense to do it more often to see where you have to make adjustments to what you're doing? Sometimes that's necessary to say, you know, in September of 2020, when we submitted this application, that seemed like a really good idea to do this in this way. but maybe by next March or April, you'll have to step back and say, we need to make some adjustments into what we propose. So ongoing evaluation of what you are doing is also a very appropriate method of evaluation. But we defer to you, the applicant, to make those decisions in developing your evaluation plan based on the scope of work that you're proposing. Again, you can propose formative or summative, impact, ongoing. So you decide what kind of evaluation that you're going to propose, and not only the type of evaluation, but whether that evaluation will enable you to produce data that are quantifiable. The next criterion for this type of project, adequacy of resources, up to 5 points. The Secretary reviews each application for information that shows that you plan to devote adequate resources to the project. This is similar to looking at your budget, because resources speaks to finances, resources speaks to human capital, resources speaks to facilities. So all of these things are interconnected, and what we're looking at for all of these things is whether it's appropriate and whether it's adequate. So we're looking for information that shows that other than library facilities that you plan to use, other than library, the facilities that you plan to use are adequate. It can be a language resource center. It can be teaching assessment lab. It can be online instructional labs. It can be web labs, whatever, other than the library. If you plan to use those kinds of facilities, are they adequate for what you're going to propose in your project? And again, for RENS, it does say language labs, museums, archives, other resources that might be available to you. How do they factor into your project, and are they adequate to move your project in the right direction? If you're planning to use equipment and supplies, are they adequate? Again, equipment is an item that has a unit cost of more than $5,000. Supplies are unit costs that have a value of less than $5,000. So this gives you a pretty wide latitude about equipment and supplies and how they are going to be used for your project, and are they adequate in these particular things. If you're planning to have a certain number of assessments printed, developed, disseminated, your surveys, is that adequate for the scope of the project? And this would include things like laptops, mobile devices. These are allowable under the IRS program. Suppose your study is going to look at a certain cohort of students, maybe an undergraduate level students who are taking a beginning level language, and there's certain protocols, certain things that you want to track for those students, and it's going to require a certain number of mobile devices, whether it be a laptop, iPhone, whatever. That is an allowable cost under the IRS program. Again, we're looking at reasonableness. If you're going to track, it's going to make a huge difference whether you're going to track 75 students versus 750 students. So these are the kinds of things you need to take into consideration in this kind of project, and that's what the criterion speaks to when they say adequate or reasonable or appropriate. So you need to identify a cohort and the needs of that cohort in a very reasonable and prudent way. The next criterion, the need for the project, worth 10 points. We're looking for whether a need for the proposed project in the field of study, whether there really is a need for that. Have you done your homework to say, there's a gap that I can fill with this project? So the Secretary reviews each application for information that shows a need for the proposed project in the field of study on which the project focuses, and that the proposed project will provide information about the present and future needs of the United States for study in foreign language and other international fields. So not only have you done a gap analysis that you know that your proposed project will fill, I know this is something that's needed. Not only that, you're looking at present and future needs. So in order for you to have identified a need and that there's a gap to be filled, you have to look at what's currently available, what's present, and then projecting out, looking at the state of affairs in the future, what you anticipate things being. You would say there definitely is a need for this project as it relates to foreign language, area studies, and other international fields. The other criterion for a research study or survey is the usefulness of expected results. Not only are you saying, I'm proposing this because I have identified a need, there's going to be use for this. So we're looking at information that shows the extent to which the results of the proposed project are likely to be used by other research projects or programs with similar objectives. In other words, I read this to mean I am doing my colleagues in this same field a favor, an intellectual research scholarly favor, by proposing this project because it will help them in their endeavors as well. So to the extent to which your project and the results of the project are likely to be used by other research projects or other programs with similar objectives, this is where you make the case for that. So you don't want to propose a project that is likely to sit on the shelf somewhere and not be used by the international education foreign language community because, again, it gets at providing information for your colleagues that you know they need as well. Criterion H, development of new knowledge. We're not retreading, you're providing a new aspect or new knowledge, and this is what we're looking for. The Secretary reviews each application for information that shows that the extent to which the proposed project is likely to develop new knowledge that will contribute to the purposes of the international education programs authorized by Part A of Title VI. Again, I'm not going to list those other programs, but essentially what this is asking is that whatever you propose, it's going to propose or result in a new knowledge, new understandings, new aspects of international education program instruction and delivery in the United States. So you might be saying, well, I proposed something and the last IRS competition that was well received. Can I look at that or start there and work through another proposal for the 2020 competition? The answer to that is yes. If you are using that as a framework for some new knowledge or new aspect of that research, that's appropriate. But obviously you would not be duplicating that effort. You would be enhancing, broadening that by saying, this is what we learned from 2017 to 2020. There is new knowledge based on that work that we have done. There is also a new direction that we need to go. It was revealed to us that we need to take this in a new direction. There's new knowledge. There's a new aspect to this that we are going to study for the next grant cycle, in this next grant cycle. And criterion I, for formulation of problems and knowledge of related research, up to 10 points. The Secretary reviews each application for information that shows that problems, questions, or hypotheses to be dealt with by the applicant are well formulated and reflect adequate knowledge of related research. You are the experts in the area that you're proposing. The reviewers are looking for information that shows that your hypotheses, what you're proposing, there is solid, substantiated reasons for doing it, it's well formulated, and it reflects adequate knowledge of the related research. So you've done your homework, it's fundamentally sound, it's well formulated. This is the research that we have done on this topic. So that's what you put into this criterion, formulation of problems and knowledge of related research. We're not pulling this out of the sky. We have done our research. We know that this is something that the U.S. government would be well served to invest in, because we've done our research, we have formulated our hypotheses, and this is why we are proposing this particular project. And subcriterion J, or criterion J, specificity of statement of procedures. The Secretary reviews each application for the specificity and completeness of the statement of procedures to be followed, including a discussion of such components as sampling techniques, controls, data to be gathered, and statistical and other analyses to be undertaken. And J is, fits well with the previous one, the formulation question. I can see why they are juxtaposed the way they are. So not only are you defending the formulation and that you have the adequate research basis for it, you're moving that in a new direction or enhanced direction of specifying the statement of procedures. So not only have we have a good formulated statement, not only are we showing that we've done our homework about it, but this is what we are going to include in this part of the narrative, that the statement is complete. It has a discussion about sampling techniques, if that's what you're going to use, the controls, the data to be gathered, and statistical and other analyses to be undertaken. Criterion K, for a research project study or survey, the adequacy of methodology and scope of project. This is up to 20 points. The Secretary reviews each application for information that shows the adequacy of the proposed teaching, testing, and research methodology. So make sure this is very clear that what you're proposing is adequate for the project, whether it's teaching, testing, and research. We're looking at how adequate the size, scope, and duration of the proposed project. Do they fit together? Is it necessary to do this for 3 years, or what you're proposing, can it be done in 2 years? Because as you have noticed in the NIA, IRS projects can be funded up to 3 years. So in presenting your narrative about the adequacy of your methodology, if you're taking whatever time you're proposing, make sure you support it by saying the size, scope, and duration of the project are appropriate. So that concludes the selection criteria for a research project, survey, or study. Those A through K. Moving on, under the competition, we are inviting applications for the development of specialized instructional materials. The following criteria for the development of instructional materials are exactly what I just went through for research, studies, and surveys. So you would revisit what we discussed for plan of operation, revisit what I discussed about key personnel. You would go back to the comments I made about budget and cost effectiveness, go back to the comments I made about evaluation plan, and go back to the comments made about adequacy of resources, because those criteria are also applicable exactly the same for instructional materials development. Where the criteria differ are F through the end of this list. Instructional materials development, need for the project, even though the title might be the same, the nuances are different for an instructional materials project. So for criterion F, need for the project, worth 10 points, the Secretary reviews each application for information that shows that the proposed materials are needed in the educational field of study on which the project focuses. So we're looking at whether the field needs a textbook, whether the field needs materials to improve language speaking skill sets, whether the field needs more tools for online instruction, etc. So whatever your development materials in the instructional educational space, we are looking for information that shows that the language or languages, the area, region, or country, or the issues or studies for which the materials are to be developed are of sufficient priority and significance to the national interest to warrant financial support by the federal government. Now, this criterion, don't be thrown off by the word studies. We're not looking at research studies. We are looking at the development of specialized instructional materials. I cannot explain to you fully, or I do not have time to explain to you fully, why this occurs in regulatory writing, but I just want you to know that we are indeed, in this criterion, looking at the development of instructional materials. So you're looking at how the project focuses on languages, the area, region, or country, or the issue or studies for which the materials are to be developed, and are sufficient priority and significance. So again, looking at that, sufficient priority and significance, in other words, is it worth your time and the government's time to take a look at this? So sufficient priority and the significance of it. So as you decide which direction to go for this particular project that you're proposing, make sure that you have identified that it is a high priority and it will make a significant difference. Criterion G, what is the potential for the use of materials in other programs? The Secretary reviews each application for information that shows the extent to which the proposed materials may be used elsewhere in the United States. There was a similar criterion for studies, and this one is reflected here. In other words, if you build it, will others come to use it? So what is the likelihood that the materials that you're developing, will they be used elsewhere in the United States? Now, elsewhere can be in a classroom, elsewhere it can be in academia, K through 16. The materials that you were developing, do they have appeal across the educational spectrum, regional spectrum, in the United States? Pretty much sums it up. But the purpose here is to really identify that what you're proposing, when you build it, when you develop it, when you make it available, will others use it? And how do you know that? How have you come to the conclusion that we're pretty confident that if we develop this particular textbook, or we develop this hybrid of online training, textbook training, it will have a national appeal. National appeal. That's what I gather from them putting United States there. It will have national scope and it will have national appeal. The next criterion to consider, the account of related materials. Again, we're looking at the extent to which something has already been done and the usefulness or the accessibility or the likelihood of it being used. But in this particular criterion, we're looking at all existing related or similar materials have been accounted for. In other words, again, you're doing an audit of what's out there already. So you're in your narrative, you're explaining that you have taken a look at all existing related or similar materials have been accounted for, and the critical commentary on their adequacy is appropriate and accurate. So not only have you scoped out the situation, you know that there's a need for yours, but this is what we have accounted for. Yes, it's out there, but in our expert minds, our commentary is that it's not quite adequate. It will not do the same thing that we are going to do through our project. This is what that first part means. So all existing related or similar materials have been accounted for. Yes, they're out there. And the critical need commentary on their adequacy, yes, we've taken a look at that. And according to our critical commentary on the adequacy of what's out there, what we're doing is more appropriate and accurate. We think what we have will fare better. The Secretary is also looking at The proposed materials will not duplicate any existing adequate material. All existing materials that you've looked at, what we're doing is not going to duplicate it. We've made an account for it. This is what we think about it. And what we're going to propose, it's not going to duplicate any existing adequate materials. Ours is unique. Criterion I, likelihood of achieving results. The Secretary reviews each application for information that shows that the outlined methods and procedures for preparing the materials are practicable and can be expected to produce the anticipated results. So when you look at practicable, in other words, what you're proposing, if it's funded, if the project is funded, and others in the field look at this and want to do the same thing, they will be able to do it. It's practicable. It's not going to inconvenience the field to do this or to use this. So there is great likelihood that what you're doing, it's practicable and it's going to produce the results that we anticipate. And so you would outline what those results, what you anticipate those results to be. So likelihood of achieving the results and the likelihood of it being practicable. And that's worth 10 points. Criterion J, in the development of instructional materials, we're looking at the expected contribution to other programs. So not only are you applying, you're applying under international research and studies, what you're proposing using these funds, you are pretty confident that it will contribute to other programs. So expected contribution to other programs, the Secretary reviews each application for information that shows the extent to which the proposed work may contribute significantly to strengthening, expanding, or improving programs of foreign language studies, area studies, or international studies nationally. So I'm substituting in the United States to emphasize that this is national scope. So what you're proposing has national implications for institutions, for teachers, for language learners, for students, a whole breadth of stakeholders. They will benefit. You are contributing to them through this project. So keep that in mind, that what you're proposing, whatever you're developing, whatever specialized materials it might be, we're looking for evidence or narrative that is compelling, that shows the extent to which your proposed work may contribute significantly to strengthening, expanding, or improving programs of foreign language studies, and I also use the word training, foreign language studies, training, area studies, or international studies nationally. Often, as an aside, we often conduct site visits, and on these campuses there are wonderful accomplishments, and we talk with language instructors, area studies instructors, and they have obviously a breadth and depth of expertise, but they often tell us that if we had more resources, we would expand what we have to offer by developing a certain instructional material or adding a level of language if we had these kinds of resources. So in some languages, there aren't any instructional materials. So a faculty member or a language instructor is spending inordinate amounts of time developing materials in order to enhance the experience of students studying certain languages. So this particular program, the IRS program, under this particular type of project or application, gives you opportunities to fill those voids, to develop instructional materials that will contribute to K-16 classrooms and cohorts and help faculty teach better. So this is what that criterion is speaking to. And finally, K, for specialized materials, we're looking at description of final form of materials. The Secretary reviews each application for information that shows a high degree of specificity in the description of the contents and the final form of the proposed materials. So we're looking at how specific you're describing the contents of your proposed project and how that will look in final form in the public domain. So description of the final form of materials. It's very similar to a PhD project that you're going to make available to everybody once your research is done. Your narrative, your project, your inquiry, what you've done, is you're going to make it available to the public. Similarly, this is what this is getting at. That not only are you proposing a project that shows a high degree of specificity in your description, but at the end of the day, how this is going to be made available in final form. What will that look like in final form? Oops, there is one more. I'm sorry. There's one more criterion, provisions for pre-testing and revision. So in the development of your specialized instructional materials, the Secretary is looking at each application for information that shows that adequate provision has been made for pre-testing the proposed materials and, if necessary, revising the proposed materials before you publish it. So in developing your instructional materials, somewhere at the end of year 2 or beginning of year 3, based on your timeline, this criterion is asking when that pre-testing is going to occur. Have you made provisions for it? You're already looking at the development, but somewhere on that timeline, you have to incorporate a time for pre-testing. And that timeline should take into consideration that there are going to be adjustments, most likely. So this gets back to the evaluation piece as well. Evaluation takes a look at formative, summative, impact, start and stop. So this pre-testing notion, the provision for pre-testing, fits nicely into that as well. So you're going to develop the materials, but you're also going to inform the readers that we do have a pre-testing timeline built into this, and based on that pre-testing, we are open to revising the materials that we are proposing before we go to publication. Again, it all goes to common sense. No one is going to jump from developing the materials to publication of those materials without the interim pre-testing, without pilot testing, without figuring out that we need to make some adjustments, because based on the cohort that we piloted this with, we need to make some adjustments. So that's what L is getting at. So A through L are for development of specialized instructional materials. bearing in mind that the first 5 are repeats, are duplicative of the ones for research and studies. So look at the information or listen to the information given for those, and then you would continue with these that we have just gone over for development of instructional materials. Taking a brief moment before we transition to the other parts of the application, what we have discussed, or what I have discussed with you in these slides thus far, that information constitutes the project narrative. Anytime that you're responding to selection criteria, including the overall criterion and all sub-criteria, that is placed in the project narrative. Those responses constitute the 30 pages that is referenced in the application booklet. That is part 3 of the grants.gov application package. So project narrative equals my responses to the selection criteria, all of them, all the headers and all of the sub-factors. You organize your application responses and you place those responses in part 3, project narrative. That is the information that the reviewers will be evaluating. It includes the preference priority that you have selected. Again, it includes the competitive preference priority that you have selected. So when they have their technical review form, it will have all of the headers and the sub-factors for the actual criteria. And then at the bottom of that list, there will be a section called competitive preference priority, and it will have the parens 5 points, and they will score the information that you have included that speaks to the competitive preference priority that you have selected. So the entire narrative includes the alpha criteria, A through K or A through L, and then it will include your competitive preference priority points for a total possible points of 100. So 95 points for the regulatory criteria, the criteria that are in the regulations, plus the 5 competitive preference points that reflect the one that you have selected, and the competitive preference points and the priorities themselves, as you will see, are just extracted from the larger menu in that program. Okay, transitioning to other pieces of the application, we're looking at the project abstract. And again, this repeats what's in the application booklet itself. This is the introduction to the peer reviewers of what you're proposing. So the project abstract introduces the peer reviewers to the project you are proposing for fiscal years 2020 through 2022. Again, the project ends in calendar year 2023, but in fiscal government budget periods, it includes fiscal years 2020 through fiscal year 2022. So in that abstract, you should clearly describe how your project activities are consistent with the IRS program purpose. It should also include information about the competitive preference priority that you are addressing in the application, and it should also give them an overview and introduction to the methodology and your anticipated outcomes and impact. The project abstract is not included in the 30-page narrative. It is not included. The suggested length for your abstract is 1 page, but if it goes over 1 page, that is fine. We have relaxed those requirements over the past 4 or 5 years, that if you go over on your abstract page, that is not going to hinder the project or keep it from being evaluated. If you need 1.5 pages to talk about your proposed project and the competitive preference priority, you may do so. And the project abstract may be single space. You may recall in the past that everything needed to be double space. You do not have to double space your project abstract. Again, the project narrative is where you respond to the selection criteria that I've discussed, including the competitive preference priorities. That's the project narrative. Another part of the application, important part, is your budget. The budget, there are 2 pieces to the budget in an IRS application, or for all of our Title VI applications for that matter. You are including the actual budget form called ED 524, and it has all of these categories on that form. It is the form that has the grid for the project years, and then the categories, and then your totals at the bottom. And it's called the Summary Budget A. So in that, you have personnel, fringe benefits, travel, and now we'll come back to the parens about COVID-19. You have supplies, contractual, other, and then you have your total direct costs, your indirect costs, and we'll come back to that parens, and then you have the total cost for the budget. On ED 524, you are entering or inputting the cost for personnel for year 1. You are entering the cost of personnel for year 2. We'll put the cost of personnel for years 3. And so for 3 years, that ED 524 form should have each one of those cells filled out for each year that you're requesting funds. And similarly, for all of the categories, you will put in the cost for each year of the grant. So your ED 524 form should not be blank for years 2 and years 3. Fill it out for all 3 years, because we put all of that information into G5. When we create the base record for the grant, we need all 3 years of information. So in personnel, you will put, obviously, the request for the project director. If you are applying as an individual, you would put whatever support that you feel that you merit for doing this project. So personnel is singular or plural. So you would put everybody that is going to be involved with the project, those persons go into personnel, with the exception of contractual. Consultants will go under contractual, or they can also go under other. But the personnel that have the key responsibilities for this project, they go under personnel, and you would fill it out for all 3 years. Similarly, for fringe benefits, put in the fringe benefits, include the rate of fringe benefits, and you will flesh that out more in Summary Budget C that I will talk about in a couple of minutes. Put in your travel costs. Now, in year 1, it is unlikely that you will be doing a lot of travel. I'm making that assumption, I should say. I'm making the assumption that travel will not be as expensive in year one of your grant, because even though you're needing to meet with people or interview people or have initial meetings, those can be conducted through team meetings or Skype or other means that will not require a lot of flying and taking into consideration all of the COVID-19 protocols that are in place. It is unlikely that your travel budget should be extensive. You can put some travel in there, but I would reserve the bulk of your travel monies in the out years of the grant and not hit the ground running asking the federal government to support a high amount of travel in the first year, because it's if the project is recommended for funding, that is going to be a line item that might be reduced from a high amount if you propose a high amount for travel. It's not that it's disallowed. I'm sure what you're proposing is necessary. It's just that the timing of it is impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. Supplies, that's very straightforward. Request the supplies that you feel are necessary to complete this project. Contractual, again, if you need if you're requesting consultants, if you're requesting the expertise of web designers, are you requesting the expertise of persons who read drafts or for curriculum materials, anything that is required to enhance or to meet the objectives of this project, they are contractual. If they require a contract, then put them under contractual, or you can put it under other. And for all of those costs, you would add them all up. Those are your direct costs. But then, in addition to direct costs, international research and studies programs have indirect costs that are unrestricted. Those of you who are familiar with their other Title VI programs, they have a restricted indirect cost rate of 8%. The IRS program, because of the nature of the program and because the overhead, the overhead costs for a lot of these projects can be much higher than 8%. The program's indirect cost rate is unrestricted. Now, that being said, if you are conducting or submitting an IRS grant and you are affiliated with an institution, it would behoove you to really convince them or encourage them, ask them, beg them to allow you to submit your IRS grant with an 8% indirect cost rate. Because if your indirect cost rate is higher, that eats into your capacity to do the real work of this project. So to the extent that you can do that, that's advisable to convince your institution, your organization, whoever you're affiliated with, ask them to allow you to submit your IRS project with an 8% indirect cost rate. Even though the program has an unrestricted rate, it will benefit the project if they allow you to submit the project at an 8% rate. So then you would add up all of these categories, and that becomes your total cost for each year of the project. Another piece of advice from me as a program officer in looking at budgets, especially if a budget is recommended for funding, I would try to put as much of your budget cost, with the exception of travel, your higher amount in the first year. And I say that only because if a project is recommended for funding, and with the non-competing continuation grants, the out years are never promised. There's no guarantee. As you can see in all government announcements, these are all estimated costs, and the out years are no guarantee. So to the extent that you can be assured of getting what you need in the first year, I would suggest putting as much of your cost as reasonable. Don't inflate the budget by all means. I'm not suggesting that. But put as much as you need to get started to make sure that you get off to a good start. Put those funds in year one. Because I have noticed at times that there's a very low cost in the first year. And in reading what you propose, I would say, oh, man, I wish they had asked for more because I can't recommend more than what they've requested. That is the cardinal rule of the federal government. We can never recommend more than what an applicant requests. So if something is low and we review it and, again, we say, wow, this is a really good project. I wish they had asked for more. I cannot recommend more than what they've asked. So looking at your budget, be prudent, be judicious, don't inflate, but make sure you ask enough that will get you off to a good start in the first year, because the government, the program office, cannot recommend more for you than what you have requested. Speaking of government and funding, one other piece. For the budget, I have the ED 524 slide on, but what's not included here but is in the application booklet is your budget section C. That's your budget detail where you give the description of what you need in personnel, where you break out your fringe benefit costs, where you itemize the kinds of trips that need to be made over the course of the project, and those other categories are fleshed out in your summary budget C. It's not in the slide deck, but it is in the application booklet how to prepare and where to submit your summary budget detailed budget information. For fiscal year 2020, the IRS allocation, and these are estimates, we have a total available of $900,000, and depending on the final sweep of Title VI programs for fiscal year 2020, there might be a little bit more available for this competition. But for right now, we're dealing with or working with $900,000. The estimated range of awards is a low for each year, $36,000 to $60,000. There's flexibility there. Again, these are estimated ranges, but you design your budget, your total budget bottom line based on what you know is needed to do an efficient and effective job with the proposed project. The estimated average size of awards based on what we have done in the past and based on these numbers, the average size would be about $48,000. But again, I advise you to focus on what you know your needs are and that they are prudent, that they meet the scope, that they are balanced, and that they make sense for what you're going to do. And then we anticipate making 18 awards. It can be upwards of 20. That will be a lot in comparison to what we awarded in fiscal year 2017, because you may recall we only invited applications for research and studies projects. So Inviting applications under 2 types of applications, it increases the number of awards that we anticipate making. So upward to 18 and possibly more, depending on the budgets that we receive. And then also, the total project period for an IRS grant is up to 36 months. And specifically, those project periods break out into these years. Year 1 of your project will begin on October 1st, 2020. It will end on September 30th of 2021. Year 2 will begin on October 1st, 2021, and end on September 30th of 2022. And the final year of the project will begin on October 1st of 2022 and end on September 30th of 2023. Project years 2 and 3 are considered non-competing continuation awards. Again, if we are fortunate to be funded, Title VI to be funded next year, we would award non-continuation awards based on your performance reports. It doesn't require another application. It only requires that you submit an annual performance report that we will review, and based on the information in the performance report, we make the determination that it is worth our investing in the project again for another year, and we would award a continuation award for the project. Some technical assistance tips that are based on experience in working with many review panels across many different programs, and I believe all of my colleagues would support these as overall tips. There are others, but these are the ones that rise to the top from those competitions and what countless peer reviewers and experts convey to us. So please provide comprehensive information, but at the same time, be as succinct as possible. Comprehensive does not mean that you keep repeating something or that you just have words on the page that do not mean anything. So you need to be comprehensive in what you're presenting to the readers, but at the same time be succinct. And that's an art. That's a real art to do that in grant writing, to cover what you need to cover, but to do it succinctly and clearly without being repetitive. Another tip, provide information in the place where it is requested. If you're requesting, if the criterion is requesting information under criterion A and all of those sub-factors, put the information in criterion A and under the sub-criteria that is asked there. Do not put it someplace else, or because you think it has applicability someplace else, don't put it where it doesn't belong. That slows up the reading process. It clearly frustrates the reviewers because we tell them no matter where it is, if you find it, you have to evaluate it. But that's not a good way to conduct a peer review. And their time is really precious, especially with this particular competition under the time constraints, to have this review in mid-September, to make awards before the end of September. The extent to which you can help that process go smoothly, please put the information in the narrative where it is asked. That will allow the reviewers to say, check, 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 score, score, score. I'm moving on to the next selection criterion. This is going very smoothly. Another tip, prepare reasonable budgets. Again, you're looking at scope, you're looking at whether it's prudent to ask for what you're asking, and whether it's the costs are reasonable. You don't want to present a budget where the reviewers will say, I read about this in the narrative, but looking at the budget, I do not see why they are asking for this much money, or I don't understand why they did not ask for more. So it can go both ways. You can ask too much, or you cannot ask for enough. So make sure when you're designing your budget, developing your budget, make sure that the costs are reasonable and they fit the scope. And the last big tip is proofread for consistency in information. You would be surprised, or you should not be surprised, that readers remembered that they read something on page 15, but on page maybe 28, and if the information is relevant and it is repeated, because this can happen, they will say, well, they said that they do X on page 15, but on page 28 there's something totally different. Or they said that the project director is going to commit 30% of their time to the project, but when I get to the budget, it only shows that they're going to commit 10% to the project. So make sure that the information that you're providing in the application is consistent to back up what you're saying in one place, that it matches what it reflects in another place. The peer review itself. Peer reviewers, and there's a lot more that we could discuss, but these are some highlights from what we tell them. Peer reviewers are asked to provide comments about the strengths and the weaknesses of the proposal. The or should not be there, because we do ask them to provide strengths and weaknesses. And we ask them to use the full range of the scoring rubrics. For example, if outstanding runs a range from 7 to 10, and if the highest score is 10 and the range is 7 to 10, they have to use the full range of that rubric. So so you will know that you got the outstanding, but within the outstanding, the information weighed in at 7, or the information in our judgment weighed in at 8 or 9 or 10. So we ask them to use the full range of the scoring rubric when they are evaluating applications. And also, if they deduct points, they must explain why they have deducted the points, even if it's 1 point, especially if it's 1 point. They have to support why they have deducted a point. If the score is perfect, we still advise them or require them, not just advise, we require them to provide comments for perfect scores. A lot of times, and in years past, reviewers were able to say, well, the score speaks for itself. They got a 10, why do I have to tell them anything more? Well, the reason is a lot of work went into the application to get the scores that they are receiving, and it is especially helpful for readers to know what it is that especially impressed the reviewers about the application. So we do ask them to provide scores even if the application or that criterion received a perfect score. Conversely, for all scores, but again, for applications that may not be as strong. When they deduct points, we ask them to provide very clear comments that will be helpful to the applicant in preparing a future submission. And then in looking at the application and the information that is provided, the technical review form has a category of unaddressed and a category of missing. Unaddressed means that the information is there, but it's not thorough. It doesn't really address the criterion fully. So points will be, there are points for an unaddressed category. And then there is a category on the technical review form that is called missing, and that's exactly what it means, that the criterion received a 0 because the information is not in the application anywhere. You heard me remark a few minutes ago that sometimes the reviewers have to find it, hunt for it, find it, and if they find it, they have to score it. In the case of missing, this is not what this is applying to. If information is missing, it's non-existent. It is not in the application, period. So you would get a score that the information is missing. So make sure that when you write your narrative that you have responded to every selection criterion and the sub-criteria underneath the criterion, cover all bases when you respond to the selection factors, because you don't want to come up missing information or not thoroughly addressing information. In terms of the peer review, the dates, September 10th through the 25th. Again, this is a real time crunch that could not be avoided. The application was not cleared through OMB until late this year, so that's why we announced the competition much later than what we would have liked. So the application closing date is September 8th. It allows us a day or two to screen them, to assign them to panels, and the peer review will start on September 10th. It will go through September 25th, which allows 4.5 days to do everything that we need to do to review the budgets, to make the recommendations, to send the slate to the Secretary of Education for the Office of Legislation and Congressional Affairs to do their notifications, for funds to be committed, and then funds to be obligated, which means obligations means the grant awards will be issued to successful applicants. So all of that has to be done within 4.5 days, so that by September 30th, 11/59/59, the grants are in the system. The number of peer reviewers, we are using 12 peer reviewers, which means 6 review panels of 2 persons each. Each reviewer has been vetted for their area studies, foreign language, international studies, expertise, especially in the space of research studies and in the space of developing instructional materials. So we are very confident that we have selected those 12 persons to do that, and they know that the workload ahead is a heavy lift, but because of their expertise and their experience in reviewing such applications, the integrity and the excellent peer review, I know, is in the offing. I have no doubt about that. For panel monitors, they are the IFLE program specialists will oversee each panel. No application is discussed without the IFLE panel specialists being present. And being present, obviously, for us is through a team meeting or Skype. We are listening to every application that is being discussed. We will go through each selection criterion with the panel to make sure that they are responding in the appropriate way to the criterion, that they have a full understanding of what they should be looking for in the process. And again, that's an overview of the process, but I can assure you that these folks do know what they're looking for. They do know quality, and they understand the important role that they play in this process. And again, we hope to make award notifications by September 30th. So that concludes this pre-recorded webinar. It will be posted on our YouTube channel. I welcome any questions that you have after you have listened to it. You may reach me at my email address, cheryl.gibbs@ed.gov, or you may call me directly at 202-453-5690. Again, my contact information, cheryl.gibbs@ed.gov, phone number 202-453-5690. I'm available to answer any questions regarding the content of the IRS program, about what's in the application package, what's in the NIA, but I'm not an expert on grants.gov, so if you have questions about grants.gov, please direct those questions to the contact information on the grants.gov site. I wish every one of you great success in this competition, and we look forward to receiving your applications, because this program is really important to the area studies community, international studies community, foreign language studies and training community. It's a unique program that allows us to enhance the scholarship and the research in this arena. And so I wish you all the best. And again, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. So stay safe, stay healthy, and the best of wishes to you. Thank you.